What's up and welcome everyone. It's Miss Kurtz and happy Monday. Today what we are going to be starting our short story unit. Short stories have different elements that make them up, so we're going to break those down bit by bit as we start reading some of our short stories. What I recommend you do while we're going through this presentation is take out a piece of notebook paper, maybe some printer paper, or if you would like and you feel like you can do this, you can pull up a Word document and type your notes there. Okay, but just writing down some key definitions and key terms so that way you can go back and look over these notes as we read through our short stories and do any assignments after today. So before we really get to read a story, we have to understand what the 5 elements of a short story are. Okay, what we're going to focus on mostly today is plot and theme, but I wanted to introduce to you all 5 just so that you kind of have them on your radar. That way you know what we're prepping to learn a little bit more about. So the first one is plot, and that's what we're focusing on specifically today. Plot is the sequence of events in a story. So basically, it's the order that a story is told in. There are 5 parts to plot. The first is exposition. The second is rising action. The third is climax. The fourth is falling action. And the fifth is resolution. Like I said, we're about to go more in depth with what plot is in all those parts, so hold tight on that. But just know that those are the 5 parts. The second element of short stories is setting. So normally whenever you read a story or if you watch a film or if you're watching a TV show, you can typically tell where the story is set. Where is it taking place? In what time period is it taking place? So many of you I know watch Umbrella Academy. The setting in the first season, we would consider it to be 2019. It's pretty modern, depending on, you can notice that it's pretty modern based on the surroundings that the characters live in, the technology that they have access to. You can deduct deduce when, where, and where they live. They also live in a metropolis, basically, so a little city. It can also, for setting, you can also consider the location where it takes place as well. So we would consider the first season of Umbrella Academy to take place in a city. The second season changes the time period completely. So we end up in the 1960s, we end up in Texas. That's the setting. Like I said, we're going to focus on setting a little bit later. Maybe not this week, but maybe next week. Number 3 is character. So characters are really who we watch after as we're reading through stories. They're the people that we relate to in the stories, whether we're watching a movie or a TV show. So it's the person in a story and their qualities. And their qualities can differ based on whatever story they're in. Like I said, we'll go more into that later on. The fourth element is point of view, and this is the angle from which the story is told. The variations we'll study this year in this class are first, second, and third person omniscient. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. I don't want to talk too much about that because I don't want to confuse us before we really have a chance to discuss it. And number 5, and we'll touch on this each week because theme is basically whatever the central message or lesson from the story is, and it can be universally applied to other texts. Okay, so maybe you've read a story before and you're like, oh, that really left me with a really great message that I can take and carry with me for the rest of my life, or at least apply to this situation. That's what theme is. So this week we're reading Renee Watson's Half a Moon. And to understand Half a Moon a little bit more, what we're going to focus on specifically is plot and then theme. But we're going to focus primarily on plot this week, so that way we kind of get those elements, those 5 parts set in stone, so that way we can move on. So like I said, plot is made up of 5 different parts that all build off of each other. To better understand these parts, and I'll show you the chart that we will use to understand the parts, we're going to use a childhood fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, to help understand the parts of a plot. This is what you call a plot diagram. It kind of looks like a triangle that kind of has little arms sticking out of it at the end. But the plot diagram is going to help us identify the parts of a typical storyline. The first part, like I said before, is exposition. This is the beginning of the story. So it's really where it reveals the characters, the background, the setting. This is where you meet your characters. This is where you get to know who they are. This is where you get to know, okay, where is this taking place at, and all of that. So that's exposition. Let's read through the beginning of Goldilocks and the Three Bears and determine what exposition looks like in this story. So here we have an excerpt from the story. It says, once upon a time, there were three bears. There was a daddy bear who was very big, a mama bear who was middle-sized, and a baby bear who was very small. They all lived together in a little cottage in the middle of the woods. Their favorite breakfast was porridge. One morning, after they made their porridge, Daddy Bear said, let's go for a walk in the woods until it cools. Mama Bear and Baby Bear liked the idea, so off they went. When the three bears left, a young girl named Goldilocks stumbled across their little cottage during her walk. Okay, so here, remember what I said about exposition. Exposition reveals the characters, the background, and setting. So I want to ask you, what characters do you learn about in this section? You might notice in the first sentence it talks about how there are three bears. And then we get more information on the characters by knowing that there's specifically a daddy bear who's big, a mama bear, middle-sized, and baby bear who was small. So we have some characters set in place. We also have a character who comes into play at the end when we meet a young girl named Goldilocks. The other things that you want to check out for exposition are the setting. So where is this set? Okay, is it set in a city? No. And we know that because if we read through here, it says that the three bears all lived together in a little cottage in the middle of the woods. So we can kind of paint that picture for us in our heads, kind of seeing where do they live? What does it look like? It's not a city. It's not this open field. We're in a cottage in the middle of the woods. So that preps us as the reader to know, okay, this is where we are. These are the characters that we're going to be paying attention to. They really love porridge. We also get a little bit more background information for what they like and also where they're going. The second part of a plot diagram is called rising action. So rising action is basically all of the events that lead up to the climax. It's all of the events that set the character in motion to address any conflicts that they might see. Okay, so most of the time in rising action, there's something called an inciting incident that complicates the story. The inciting incident is the moment where the character realizes I have to do something, or the character starts to do something in the story that sets in motion any other conflicts that'll happen later on in the text. Now you might be like, and this is where the conflicts are revealed. You might be like, okay, that's a little confusing. So let's look at it a little bit more in detail using Goldilocks. So Goldilocks knocked, and when no one answered, she walked right in. At the table in the kitchen, there were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was hungry. She tasted the porridge from the first bowl. This porridge is too hot, she exclaimed. So she tasted the porridge from the second bowl. This porridge is too cold, she said. So she tasted the last bowl of porridge. Ah, this porridge is just right, she said happily, and she ate it all up. So Goldilocks enters into the bear's cottage and starts eating their porridge. Now, what we know as the reader is that the three bears love their porridge, and they simply walked out because they wanted to wait for the porridge to cool. Now, Goldilocks is the one that's taking advantage of this situation, eating their porridge, and as we learn later on, she starts to feel like she needs to sit down, so she goes and uses their chairs, she goes and uses their beds. She's not the best and most considerate guest, and that's what we learn in this section. The third part of plot is climax. So climax is not the end of a story. Many people think that that's the case. It's not. The climax is the turning point of the story. This is where the character receives new information, accepts or rejects it, and then acts on it. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail here. So in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, here's this section where you would see the climax. Goldilocks was very tired by this time. She went upstairs to the bedroom. She lay down in the first bed, but it was too hard. Then she lay in the second bed, but it was too soft. Then she lay down in the third bed, and it was just right. Goldilocks fell asleep. So that's actually technically still a part of the rising action. We still see her kind of go through these conflicts of finding, okay, what's just right for me? But this next line, pay attention. As she was sleeping, the three bears came home. So this moment is the turning point. This is the climax, is when the bears come home, because we know why they return home. It's to eat their porridge, but they'll realize that the porridge has been tampered with, some of their stuff's been used, and now there's this random little girl sleeping in their bed. So this is where the climax happens, and this sets in motion for the falling action. This is where events and complications fall into place. The falling action happens as a result of the climax and leads to the resolution. So the falling action is basically all the events that kind of we see as a result of the character's actions. So here's an example from Goldilocks. Someone's been eating my porridge, growled Papa Bear. Someone's been eating my porridge, said Mama Bear. Someone's been eating my porridge, and they ate it all up, cried the baby bear. Now, you'll notice here is that the bears go through and they realize all of our stuff's been like messed with. Our porridge has been eaten, our chairs have been sat in, and some of it's been broken, or some of the chairs have been broken. Our beds have been unmade. Someone's been sleeping in my bed. That's what Papa Bear and Mama Bear say. And Baby Bear recognizes that Goldilocks is right there and she's still sleeping. So the complications keep going. They keep adding on to one another. And we notice that Goldilocks still hasn't woken up. So at the end, Goldilocks woke up. She saw the three bears. She screamed, help! And she jumped up and ran out of the room. Goldilocks ran down the stairs, opened the door, and ran away into the forest. Now, this is where people might be like, oh, that's the end of the story. So, but actually, it's just part of the falling action because we have to have Goldilocks leave in order to make sure that we can find some sort of resolution at the end. What's going to happen with the bears? Are they going to fix their house and fix up more porridge? And what happens with Goldilocks? Are the bears going to chase after her and like attack her, or is she going to make it back home? And that's what leads us to the resolution, or what we would call the denouement. The resolution is the ending. So at this point, any like secrets or questions or mysteries that are still there are solved by the characters, or the author explains them. So in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the resolution / denouement is pretty chill. All right, so you'll read it and it'll say, the bears cleaned their house and lived there for many years to follow. Goldilocks never returned to the home of the three bears again. So this final outcome is explained by the author. So the bears clean up their house, they live there, and Goldilocks, we recognize, never comes back to hang out with them. And that's the resolution. That is your plot diagram. So all events will follow, most stories will follow this structure. Now you might be like, but can't that be mixed up a little bit? It can. So sometimes you might read a story or you might watch a film wherever the resolution, the ending, is revealed at the beginning of the story. But no matter what, some stories, you have to recognize that stories all follow some sort of pattern, and that can help us track any character development, the change in setting, and also help us develop themes. So after you read a story, you often have some sort of lesson that sticks with you, and from that lesson, you can pick out a theme. So a theme is the central message or lesson that can be universally applied. Now, what I mean by that is it can't just be, so you take a theme or a lesson from the story and be like, and you can be like, oh, Goldilocks and the Three Bears taught me that you shouldn't mess with other people's stuff. That can be applied to other situations in your life. Like maybe if you want to say to your little sister or little brother, hey, I want to teach you a lesson about how you shouldn't mess with my stuff. You might tell them that theme or tell them that message or that lesson based on what you read from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's universal. Now, a theme is not a topic, and we'll get more into detail about this later on this week. Topics are things like love, danger, wisdom, race, gender, religion. Those are topics. But a theme is a full statement that conveys some message or lesson about a certain topic. So this year we're reading Romeo and Juliet, and you might think off the bat, just knowing what you know about Romeo and Juliet, you might think, oh, this story is about love. That's the theme. But actually, Romeo and Juliet is going to teach us so much more about love rather than just thinking about the topic. What does it tell us about love? What does it teach us about love? Let me show you an example because you might be like, Miss Kurtz, I don't get it. A topic and a theme from Goldilocks might look something like this. So we know that Goldilocks is pretty selfish. She doesn't really consider the bears or whoever lives there any of their happiness. She just uses them. But then at the end, she realizes that she's stolen from three bears and she immediately regrets it because she runs away. So, a topic from Goldilocks that I might take away from the story is something like selfishness. So, then our theme statement, when I think about that, has to have something to do with selfishness. So, what did I learn from the story? Well, Goldilocks was able to find the right bed for her. She was able to find the porch that was just right for her, the chair that was just right for her that she inevitably broke. So, she had some sort of happiness, but at the end she didn't actually get to keep any of it. She actually put herself into more danger by taking advantage of other people. So our theme statement might look something like this. Selfishness may lead to short-term happiness, as we saw with the porridge and the chair and the bed, but it can also lead to regret because she runs away. She fears what's going to happen to her. Okay, so now here's where I want to explain to you what you'll be doing in this slide. Okay, so below are the events of Little Red Riding Hood. So that's also a classic fairy tale. If you would like to read through it, I can send you the link to it. Using the plot diagram below, drag and drop the events to the correct part of the plot diagram. So, guys, all I want to know today, and I'm going to exit out of this, all I want to know today is can you match the event to the different parts of plot? So what you'll do is you'll click out like how I did in this presentation, and you'll drag and drop the box to wherever you think it's supposed to go. Okay. If this gets a little too complicated and you're like, Miss Kurtz, it's not working, it won't drag and drop for me, what I would recommend you do is open up a Word document or a Google Doc, share it with me, and show me that you can put those events in order. Okay? But that's today's lesson, guys. If you have any questions, we will talk about this a little bit more tomorrow in our Google Meets. So be sure to show up at our Google Meets if you would like to review the terms and the different parts of the plot. And then I will assign you guys your first short story to read. But that's it for today.